I'm going to introduce this life cycle of the honeybee family poster. This is something each of us should have on our wall. I want it to be, I know it's big and bulky, but I'm hoping we can get it passed around. Or not, okay, or not. It'll be here for later. But what's cool about it is it's got the number of days that each case of the honeybee spends either as an egg or as a pupa, as a larva, or doing work. So this is a handy thing to know about your bee math for if you're trying to judge where your colony is in the growth. Thank you, Janet. Okay, it works. Okay, so I would like to start. I would like to start. Ooh, that's nicer. By just expressing how thankful I am to be invited back to speak a second time at the Mount Diablo Bee Association. Tonight's talk is going to be more about how to run a hive inspection. In the previous talk, I talked about what top bar beekeeping is to me and how I got my apiary to grow. Today we'll be talking about a little bit about the cycle of bees and especially what the first year beekeeper should be doing to educate themselves for the years ahead. So just to help me out one more time, if you are a first year beekeeper, can you raise up your hand, please? Okay, hands down, please. If you are a second year beekeeper, can you raise up your hand? Okay, hands down, please. Third or more, can you raise up your hands? Hey, all right. Well, I hope to have something for everybody here tonight. I'd like to start with this picture here. It's one of my favorite pictures ever. It's an entrance hole to my beehives. I have 6 of them on my larger beehives, and if you notice this bee right in the center, she's got a little bit of propolis in her mouth. And what she is doing as an extension of the hive's thought is she is closing that hole because bees are the masters of their nests, and that's the whole theme of what I'm going to be talking about today. They know what to do inside the box, and we need to recognize that. So they need to control airflow and temperature. So if they need to close a hole, they will. We're going to talk about what bees do in a nest. Then we're going to talk about what beekeepers can do throughout year 1, and especially going to be going over how to conduct a non-intervention inspection, simply getting inside the box, knowing what you're looking at, and putting it all back together. You can't help but talk about Varroa a little bit with all this. And later I'm going to be putting my slideshow on my website for anybody to download. And last year's talk is also there as well. I'm pleased to report that I just got a job offer. I'm going to be a high school biology teacher out in Manteca, so I'm happy. Thank you. I grew up in Hercules, so even though I don't live in Contra Costa any longer, I am pretty familiar with weather patterns out here, and we're set up for a really good year with all this rain. I wish it would stop raining too, but the plants have soil moisture, and that means we're going to have swarms and we're going to have honey when the heat comes back. The successful bee always continues to educate themselves. So I've got 2 slides of some of my favorite articles. Again, these will be online, so you can click the link there. I'm going to start out highlighting scientificbeekeeping.com and then Constructive Beekeeping by Ed Clark, because the constructive beekeeping talks a lot about thermoregulation and relative humidity and how the bees make a nectar that may be 80% water into a honey that's 18% water, and how they do it and how we can best help them. And then there's more experts. You may recognize some of these names. One book we should all have is the Cal Bee book, which talks about beekeeping on California's coast. I have a copy of that here as well. We can look at it later. This picture shows one of my first apiaries in West Africa when I was beginning learning about bees. And I had another apiary, but out of the 2 locations, out of 2 years of time, I never made a honey harvest for a variety of reasons, but beekeeping takes time. So I always like to come back to that picture to remind me about we can't expect it right away. So honeybees are the masters of their nests. They are looking for a box that's big enough, and they're looking for a box that they can defend, something that has a small entrance. And where they are raising up their eggs, they need that temperature to be constant. They like a warm, dry space. And that, without that constancy of temperature, diseases come up, breaks in the brood pattern come up, and problems come up. So knowing that, it's not a bad idea to insulate your beehives. You can use a little bit of acoustic soundboard, put it right underneath your top cover. That'll keep them warm in the winter and helps keep them dry in the summer. This average is relative humidity of 50 to 60% is just an average. In the nest, it will be more humid, but back where they ripen honey, it will be very dry as they can get it, to help coax the water out of that nectar. If you were to observe a bee in a corner of a house or in a tree, they always start building at the top of that space, and then they work their way down. And they always want to be able to walk all over the beehive because they need to know how the air moves in that space, and because their behavior goes from the top towards the bottom, I would think that in order to mimic that with our own beehives, we could do well to under-super our beehives. Instead of placing our honey supers on top, we would slide in frames down below, and that would give them encouragement to continue to draw new wax, move the nest down, and leave the honey on top. There it is. Knowing that propolis can varnish the beehive walls and make the hive a better condenser to take that water out of the nectar, selecting for propolis collection is a huge deal. It's going to make the bees' life a lot better, their work a lot easier. It makes our equipment a bit stickier, but that's just fine of a trade-off if we get more honey out of it. Okay. In optimal conditions, we can imagine the beehive, the brood nest, as a perfect sphere. I'd like everybody to hold up their hand like this. This is the center of your bee brood nest. This is your worker bees. Take your thumb and wiggle it around. Drone comb is part of the brood nest, but it's kind of less important. They usually put that on the outside of the brood nest, not all the time, but it goes towards the outside. So we're going to put our thumb right there. Outside of the brood nest, take a hand, put it on top. Outside of the brood nest, there's a sheath of pollen that's going to provide nutrition to those young bees. And then outside of the pollen, there is a honey band, and the honey provides insulation. So I have my nest, my drone brood. Outside of that is my pollen. Outside of that, hoping to infinity, is the honey reserves. That honey gives a lot of insulation, thermal insulation for the beehives. I guess I should talk with this. Okay. Now, the brood nest will move throughout the box, especially if you have a double or a triple deep. It's going to move. But I'm going over these basics to show us what the bees want in their nest. Because when we humans come along with frames, we kind of mess it all up. Now here's where I start to drop some thing that may go against what you've read so far. If you're in a first year of beekeeping, especially if you've got a swarm or a package of bees, take at least one of them and just do nothing to it. Besides giving them room to grow, don't feed them stimulant sugar. Don't harvest honey from them because they're growing and they need all those calories. But your goal is to observe the natural flow of spring buildup, summer honey ripening, fall decline, overwintering. That is your goal as first-year beekeeper, just to understand the sine wave of their pattern throughout the year. I'm not saying don't have fun with them. Do get in the beehive. Your goal is also to master the non-intervention inspection, simply looking at the boxes, knowing what you're looking at, and educating yourself. And colonies are going to die. So when they die, that's the wrong button. When they die, you get in that beehive and you figure out what they died from. Was it a varroa infestation? Was it a wax moth infestation? And if you don't know, you talk to those mentors that Wayne Scott mentioned, and you get other beekeepers involved so that you can continue to learn. In your second year of beekeeping, that's when it gets more fun. Or if you're starting with overwintered colonies. There's a lot of different splitting methods out there that you can read about. Splits can happen as early as now and get good success. You can continue splitting and increasing your colonies all the way through July, especially in a year like this where we've had some rain. I'd say that there's going to be some strong honey flows through June. You should plan for some of your queens replacing themselves in the fall. And in that second year, when you're able to make these decisions to either grow or make a honey crop, that's when your awareness of the colony's condition, how much food they have, the quality of their brood, that's when it begins to be much more important. And if you're paying attention to varroa mites, that's when knowing the varroa mite threshold becomes much more of a tool to you. So I mentioned I'm not going to go too much into philosophy tonight because I'm not a treatment beekeeper, but I always keep an eye on my varroa just to know where their population is, because it helps me decide whether I'm going to harvest or split. In the third year of beekeeping, you do it all again. What worked? What didn't work? And each year you get a little bit better and it gets a little bit smoother. And there it is. And this is what you need every day, taking it with you to the apiary. I guess you see that one up there. I've got a lot of these. I don't use them as much as I should, but each one of these columns is a important thing to consider. For example, do you always go to your beehive at 4 p.m.? If you do, you're gonna only see bees at 4 p.m. You gotta see them at 10 a.m. You gotta see them at 1 p.m. Because at 5 p.m. when all those foragers are back and they're just hanging around the house and they're just loafing, they're gonna sting you in the face because those are the oldest, most feisty bees. So you gotta vary your time of day, get a good sampling. For young beekeepers or for all beekeepers, we work under the assumption that there are eggs in our beehive, because if there are eggs in our beehive, then the colony is working. And I'm going to pass these photos along. Eggs are really, really small. They're really small and they're in the bottom of these darn cells. So you have to look pretty closely. So I'd like to pass a couple photos around as I talk. When you get into it, you can know where your queen was mated or how old your queens are. But these are all columns that are necessary for accurate hive keeping. I'm excited too. We're almost about to get into the beehives, but I still got to pass around some more stuff. Let's say that we're going to go do an inspection, and we may have our bee suit on, but our veil's not on our head yet. We're just walking up to the beehive. The first thing we need to watch is just how are they entering the beehive. And I'm asking you to sit down, just like sit and watch them for at least a minute. You want to know, how are the bees landing? Are they landing 5 at a time? Are they landing 25 at a time? Because if they're landing 25 or 50 at a time, give them 10 minutes. And I don't want to be standing in the middle of that and blocking their way. But bees kind of come back in waves throughout the day. If they are carrying pollen back, and you see pollen baskets on their hives, on their legs, that's telling you that they're likely raising brood. It tells you that you likely have eggs. Things are likely okay. Besides carrying pollen, how many different colors of pollen do you see? Because each plant makes a different color of pollen, and bees like a varied diet. So, and do you see bees actively fighting other bees off of their beehive? Do you see ants? Do you see evidence of skunks scratching up in there? All of these little things could give you a heads up before you get into the beehive. It can explain reasons why bees might be stinging you in the face when a week before they were much nicer. So you can take these pictures of bee biology with you to the apiary. And And I suggest that you do, because there's nothing worse than getting into the beehive and forgetting what you're looking for, or seeing something that you don't know what it is. I wish that they would update these photos, but they still sell these same photos from the 1980s or 90s. Okay, so we haven't yet put our veil on, because we're just standing in front of the beehive. And I think choosing the right outfit is so important, because as beekeepers, we need to think like a bee, and so we need the best of our human senses to try and impersonate some bee senses. I don't really recommend using full body suits. I have one, and I keep it for the messiest, most dangerous work that we do as beekeepers, but you can't see what's going on as well with a veil. The sound that you hear underneath that veil is going to be different otherwise. You're going to hear a lot more of your own breath. You're going to be very hot and uncomfortable. And this shouldn't be overlooked here. You have a false sense of invincibility. Bees will find a way into that suit. Moreover, if you feel godlike out there, you're not going to be noticing harm that you may be causing in the neighborhood. I think that beekeeper is important to be stung, especially on the hands and arms, especially while you're working the bees, because each one of those stings is a little bit of a dialogue that lets you know, hey, Miss Bee doesn't think that's a good idea, exactly how you're doing that. And in fact, if you get stung a lot, you'll get less and less a reaction to them. So this is where my crazy start comes out. And if that's not for you, that's fine. But I think you should get stung. You have skills if you are keeping bees gloves-free. I'm never going to bag on a veil. You should always have a veil if you need one. There are colonies I have that I do wear a veil for, although I prefer just to beekeep like I'm standing right now. All right, we're almost there. This is what I choose to wear. Sometimes I'm wearing shorts and sandals underneath. But if a bee's flying up behind me, they see I'm very well covered. I've got that sun hat right there, and if my hands are full and a bee's buzzing me, I often am kind of holding my head like this while I do whatever I need to do. So we're very well protected in that simple get-up right there with a collared shirt. Collars are nice because you can tie the veil around the collar and make it safe. If you have a suit, like if you're doing something messy like a cutout, you need that safety. Here there are thousands of flying, stinging insects trying to find home after being taken out from a building. So you need that safety at the same time. It all depends on what you're doing. But our goal as beekeepers is to work with our bees. We're not trying to force them. We're trying to exploit them, basically. Okay, so we want to maximize all of our senses. One thing, smell. Smell is important. Smell can tell you if you have American foul brood in your colonies, if there's a mildew problem in here. The smell of bees making wax and ripening honey is divine. So all of these things are important. Touch is important. I have, as one of my favorite tools, is a spray bottle of water, and that keeps your hands from being too sticky. It keeps your tools from being too sticky. There are times I set colonies down and I just say, I'll come back later, because they're not in the mood to be inspected. Okay, we're there. This is a drone bee. I'm just going to start passing some of these along so we can all know what we're seeing here. And this bee that has its hind up in the air, its rear end up in the air, it's exposing a gland called the nasonog gland. It's making a lemony type of smell that you need to know what that smells like. I'd also like to pass this one around. That smell is telling bees, hey, try and find me. I don't know where I am. So that smell can alter their behavior, or sometimes you can use smoke to get them to not fan as much. I'll save that one. Okay. So in that, we're going to start by inspecting a nuke. And it's been a while since I've done frame beehives, but I think I still know how to do these. I used to have about 10 of these. those frames, this end of your Hive tool is going to be your absolute favorite. Can I just talk like this, or do you? No? Okay. They really can't hear me. Okay, I'm sorry. This hook end is your favorite end. My favorite end. Well, this is why. When you are getting in between the frames, these things can be really glued together. And you can take your hook end and get it in between two of those bars and use the lever action to pry them apart. And what that will do is it will, thank you, Judy, is it will save your frame spacers. Frame spacers are these little wood pieces that stick out. And when the frames are pressed tightly together, it makes this area called the B space, which is important in how they're planning out their hive. We want to maintain that B space. If it's too big of a space, they're going to build comb there. If it's too small of a space, they're going to seal it up. So B space is how humans have been able to get these boxes together. And really, the lever end is going to be great for prying bars apart or by putting them back together tightly. Okay. This would be a colony about this time of year. See, the grass is pretty big. It's 7 boxes tall. You know, it's a strong overwintered colony taken a few years ago. And I've taken it apart, and this is showing how you want to start each of your hive inspections. This box right here used to be on top. Okay, this box was second from the bottom. It was on top of here, and then we have box 3, box 4, box 5, box 6, box 7. So at the bottom of this stack was what used to be up there. The reason they're all stacked up like this is it's going to keep the most bees possible in one contiguous group, and it's going to keep them in the dark. And you can even take your insulation that we mentioned and put that on top to keep the bees in the dark. Bees like to be in the dark. If they have sunlight, it kind of makes the smells go everywhere. They get off task. I'm not going to lift an 80-pound deep, though, on the top of that box. So you can put the frames going straight up and down and rest boxes that way. That way the frames won't fall and crush bees. When you're inside this first box and you need to take a frame out and inspect it, it's perfectly all right to take out that frame and rest it on the ground like this. Rest two or three of them on the ground. As long as they're vertical like that, the bees won't have a problem. Put them in the shade. You don't want the hot sun beating down on that and melting your wax. If you don't have one of those hive covers, other beekeepers use towels or other hive tops. Anything to kind of keep the bees contained is going to keep you from getting stung in the face too often. I am a firm believer in using smoke as a tool. Your bee smoker should always be lit. When you spray smoke on a bee, it shuts down their antenna and it makes their eyes hurt. And understandably, they're going to walk in the other direction. So you can tell bees not to look at you, essentially. And it also induces them to fill up on nectar, which makes them a little bit more lazy, not incapable of stinging you, but a little bit more lazy. And when you're deconstructing that tower, you want to avoid any popping or jarring events. I want to keep the bees calm, so use that spatula end of the beehive, get in at the corners and work your way around and take the beehive off. Get a good one thing here is you offset the corners a little bit so that in the sun the propolis doesn't stick itself back together. If you offset the corners, it makes it easier to pick back up. In that first box, all the way on the bottom, there are constantly field bees returning. Up to about 1/3 of the hive is out at any given moment, and they're all coming back, okay? So you want to get through that box on the bottom efficiently. I'll tell you what you're about to look for, but let's talk about those bees coming back. Foragers are the oldest bees. They're going out, they're getting the resources to make the hive live. If they're coming back full of nectar, their primary goal is to find another bee and unload their stomach contents. They vomit in the other bee's mouth, so let's get this picture going around. And that bee that they give the nectar to then goes and looks for a place to put that nectar. If the forager can't find somebody to unload on, it creates this traffic jam. And like we see in the Bay Area, a traffic jam can have lingering effects for hours. So it's important to get through that first box in order to preserve the rest of the day for the colony's work schedule. Every day, nectar is moved from the bottom frames up to the top or towards the back once nighttime goes. And so they put the nectar there in the day, and then they move the nectar at night. And each time they move the nectar, they open up more space for the queen to lay. So we got to keep traffic jams to a minimum. Yeah. Did I say everything there? I did. Oh, if you do find the queen, great. You know where she is, and you can go through the rest of your box a little bit better. As long as you see eggs in your beehive, you can assume that they are growing well. As long as you see eggs, you don't need to see the queen. She's royal, she's beautiful, but you don't need to see her. That lesson of putting your frames back together and making them tight, if you don't do that, you'll learn about why it's so important the next time you try to open it up, because the bees will have stuck everything together with propolis and burr comb and built everything everywhere, and you're going to have to do some scraping to get your frames movable again. Because bees want to control the airflow, they need to manipulate humidity, they need to keep the hive defensible, and if they can stick an extra egg here or there, they'll do it too. Those frame spacers are so important. Don't destroy those. Okay, so there's the picture again. One more time, we want to keep that space provided by these two frame spacers. I have met beekeepers that actually sand these spacers down a little bit in order to fit 11 frames inside their box because they want to raise smaller bees. It seems that the bees can go a little bit smaller, but they do not like bigger. So you always got to compress these things. Really. Okay, so queen pheromone. First, let's look at our queen. She's pretty. She's giving off a bunch of smell, and all these worker bees around her are touching her and getting those smell compounds on themselves, and then they transfer them to other bees. And it's called a pheromone, and the spread of these pheromones is what largely drives the workforce of the colony. So as long as she's there, her presence will be felt by the whole hive. That's why it's important to keep bees in large groups, because if they can smell pheromone, they will remain much calmer. When they don't have enough pheromone on them, they actually make a different noise. You can have a group of bees without their queen and a group of bees with their queen, and the ones without will be making a louder, a little bit more ticked off noise. So you can use that to help say, oh, my queen's over here, if you need to really find her. Okay, so knowing that you have eggs is so important. I underlined it, I italicized it, I bold-faced it, and I put it in red. That's all you really need to look for in the beginning as a first-year beekeeper. Other things you can consider, and I have pictures that we're going to go through each of these, are how tight that queen is laying, the brood pattern, the presence of food stores, how many bees are running around with deformed wings or otherwise weak-looking bodies. And when you're putting your boxes back, you make sure you put them on the exact same way, because you wouldn't want a stranger rearranging all of your furniture. And that's really what we're doing if we put a box simply backwards. Frames go back in the exact same places. Boxes go back in the exact same places in this non-intervention inspection. So let's see some pictures. Eggs are really small. They're about as big as that bee's antenna. Okay, so this is the best picture I could take of an open brood comb. And what we see here are larvae, about the biggest larvae you're going to see. But good things to spot in this picture are that the larvae are shiny, they're wet. Here's a second picture. I like the first one better. Okay, we can see how they are shiny, and they're shiny because they are sitting on a big pool of food. It's called royal jelly. It helps them grow into nice, strong bees. In fact, this bee, I don't know why the pollen's there, but pollen is there, but the larva can't eat that. If the larva is wet, if it has nutrition, it's going to grow into healthy bees. If you see larvae that are there, but they're not well fed, then you may have problems a month or 2 months down the line when those poorly malnutritioned bees are hatched out and then have to work themselves. Commercial beekeepers are always looking for wet brood, and they will feed a pollen supplement in order to keep body fats and body proteins up in their worker bee force. Scanning out a little bit, this picture shows the brood pattern. All of these tan cells are, each one of those little circles will hatch out a worker. And you can see by the clumping of those cells that the queen is laying nearly every cell. Going back and sticking your face close to this comb, you could then look inside each one of these empties and see, well, maybe there's a little bit of pollen in this one, or maybe there's a little bit of nectar in that one, or even the queen came back and relayed in those empty cells. It's not, as long as they're still doing something with that space, they're on task. Conversely, this comb does not have a good brood pattern. There's a lot of empty space. There's not even eggs. There's brood of very different ages in this comb. There's a nice honey band forming on top, but there's no pollen. If we refer back to our hand movements, there's no pollen around this brood nest. So if all of your brood frames looked like this, you would be worried for your bees because they are malnourished bees. Also, good things to look at for the brood pattern are there coverage of live bees. If there is a good coverage of live bees on top of the comb surface, they're also being kept warm enough, which is necessary for their development. Some African subspecies of the honeybee, they hatch out up to a day earlier because of the added heat in the tropics and the subtropics. And that's kind of universal for all insects. Heat makes them go faster. Here's a phenomenal brood pattern. The queen starts laying most times in the center, and then she'll make this outward spiral. So as we get to these edges of the brood comb, these are larvae here that are just about to be, have a cap put on them, and then smaller larvae as we go out. Bees can either store protein as pollen in the comb up here, or they can store it within their bodies. And they use their body fats to raise the next generation. So sometimes bees only lay enough eggs that they know they can feed. Combs full of pollen are like the treatment-free insurance against varroa because it ensures that the bees are going to have good nutrition there. This would have been taken, I would say, in June or July, when perhaps the nest is starting to contract and the honey band on top is growing down, because this is a top bar that the bees would want to winter on, where the honey is directly overhead and insulating them. Okay, you better get good at killing bees. Because I hate it when I have my hands full and there's that one or two bees that are always wants to check you out. So if you can grab one, if it like gets on you, grab one, you kill it, you're going to preserve the cool of the rest of your hive inspection. Often it really is just that one bee that's having a problem. So you kill it, and then you're preserving the death of more in the future. You want to always hold your hive tool with a strong grip. It's not a pencil, it's a tool, so hold it like that. When you have bees land on you, they're not always going to sting you, so you could practice flicking your elbow or lightly saying, oh, you're flying now, you're not on me. And then the frame shake, because sometimes it's hard to put, say this was covered in bees and you don't want to like roll any of them and crush them as you put it back. There's a shaking method that you can use to quickly cleave the bees off. And it really is just shaking movement. You do it over the hive, all the bees fall down, and now you have a nice clean frame. Easy. And those bees that just fell off, they're not ready to fly anyway. Their body is cool. Their body is not warm, so their muscles aren't ready to fly, so they really just fall. And they don't mind it, I think. You take that water spray bottle. You've got to keep your gloves clean, keep your hive tools clean. If you're going to use smoke, you have to also let that smoke clear. So you puff smoke, and you may have to wait 6 seconds for the smoke to disperse, the bees to get the message and start walking the other way. If you just keep blowing smoke on the bees, the only thing that they know is that they're in pain. They have to get the ability to walk to the clean air. So again, my crazy is coming out. You get stung in the inspection, say it's in your arm. You grab that bee and you crush it and you throw the body in the grass because you want that smell of crushed, dead, injured bee away from the beehive. You don't want to alert the others. And it will be trying to fly out. Then you are going to remove the stinger with your thumbnail, cover it up with chlorophyll, rub in some grass, cover it up with smoke, and then if you can do that within about 12 seconds, then feel free to curse. But you give the colony a puff of smoke too, because there's probably a few that are watching you. What we're really doing is we are taking any smell of injured bee and getting it away from the colony in order to keep the other 40,000 of them on task. And it's done easiest without gloves. And this is kind of where gloves can be a detriment, because our gloves will begin to smell like crushed up bees if we get stung a lot. In the past year, we had this Concord incident with the hives, with the dogs dying, and another one happened in Sacramento. It's really important that you get used to being stung. I mean, I know I'm crazy, but if you have a problem, it's your responsibility. You need to muscle through it and close up that beehive. When I was in West Africa, it was like a training facility where I learned how to beekeep, and they had community hive suits. I've seen an empty hive suit be swarmed and stung just because it smelled like so many previous stings before. I don't think that they knew that, oh, this white thing is a beekeeper. They just could smell it. So you can wash your bee stuff too. All these little things really can add up to a better hive inspection. On more intensive stuff for second, third year beekeepers, the only thing I would say about getting the bees to draw comb faster or breed faster is that you want to keep their brood nest contiguous at all times. There's a method called checkerboarding where it would be you take a blank frame and you stick it directly in the box and directly in the center of the nest. I don't recommend that. Instead, if you have your brood, if you have your brood nest like this and your pollen's on the outside, instead of putting a frame in the brood like this, you can instead put a frame in between the pollen and the brood nest, giving the bees empty space to draw into, but they still have access to their food. Otherwise, by checkerboarding, you're creating quite a big break in their contiguous brood nest, and it's going to make them have a lot of wasted energy to heat, wasted time to transport those nutrients. It's going to throw them all off. So always add frames to the outsides, or under super on a beehive, and they'll move down because that's their natural instinct. How much time do I have left? I don't know. Okay, very good. I passed around the drone picture, right? Okay, good. I love drones. Drones are cute. They don't have stingers, so they're a great thing to tie a little piece of dental floss to and give to a kid. And they're essential. They are essential to bee colonies. They're a luxury item. The bees view them as a luxury item. They are the least important in day-to-day activities, but they are the most important when it comes to mating, which is actually the goal of life. Reproductive swarms only happen after a colony is producing drones. So if your colony doesn't have drones, don't worry about them swarming. There, easy, done. Drones can be an issue though, because the varroa mite prefers to reproduce in the drone brood because it has a longer maturation time than the workers or the queens. So a couple times a year, people who make money with their bees will cut out the drone comb to, at a key time, reduce the mite population in their beehive. That's fine on a 1 or 2 time per year event. But if you're constantly removing drone comb from your beehive, you're messing with their momentum. You're messing with their natural instinct. Bees want to have drones. And they will stop any honey crop that they're working on. They'll stop raising more workers to raise enough drones to be able to take part in mating. And the bees will trim their drone brood. The drone brood is the first type of brood to be cannibalized if conditions and incoming food is less. And they'll kick live drones out, so they won't support more than they can, but they will support a maximum effective squadron of drones to go out there and mate. One of the funnier things is if there's a really intense nectar flow and the bees don't have a space because the rest of the box is full, they will store the nectar inside the stomach of a drone. Yeah. I'm also going to pass these 2 combs around one after the other. These are from my top bar beehive, and on this second comb there are some drone cells, and when you compare them to the smaller worker cells, you'll see that the drone truly is a bigger bee. It's got bigger muscles. It needs a bigger cell. From now until July, if you come across a capped queen cell, oh wait, what's a capped queen cell? This is a capped queen cell. If you come across one of these with the cap on it, this is a perfect time to make an increased colony and protect against future winter losses. If your queen cell already has that capping on it, the hive probably already swarmed. It doesn't have a queen in there. But usually you'll find a half dozen or more of them at a time. And you can cut out the best ones with a knife, cut out the best ones and give them to a colony that you make up made of donated combs from other colonies. And this is a way that you're never going to spend money on bees again. Between making nuclei, increased colonies, and swarming, not only do you not have to buy bees every year, but you're helping local stock thrive because you have bees that were able to reproduce in our environment, and then you may have more bees than you know what to do with. Oh, my clicker. In general, the later in the year that it is, the bigger you want to make that nucleus colony, because it does need to grow into a deep box. It does need to grow into at least 10 strong frames to go through winter. So you give them more resources towards the end of the year. Okay, I talked about swarming. Now go get your swarm when it leaves. But again, for these first and even second and even third year beekeepers, swarming is a great educational opportunity. You get to see why they swarmed when you go back into the brood nest, and you get to see a perfect example of how well packed every brood comb is, how thick the pollen bands are around it, how it's primed to grow into another strong colony. And using that visual information, what you see, how they left their house, you can think about what your own splits need to take off. You can think about how you're going to get the bigger honey crop. It's by getting more bees. More bees make more honey. And then if you did capture your prime swarm, you'll be amazed at how quickly they can build up again. In this year, I'm so excited. We're out of the drought. So it's going to be a great year for honey. There's moisture in the ground. There's going to be a lot of swarms out there this year. Sometimes the swarms come to you, and you should have empty hives set out all the time. There was my neighbor's birthday party with trampoline was going on just on the other side of the fence. And I told him it'd be done in a half hour, and it was. But yeah, free bees, it's like fishing. It's great. When we're thinking about what our bees have to do, they have to make the honey crop, they have to make winter bees, which have lots of body fat and can get through all of winter and then raise more brood. We have to realize bee stress is real, just like our stress is real. Bees get stressed out if they don't have good food. By good food, I mean abundant variety of pollen. Not even the best commercial supplements match real pollen in terms of nutrition, nutrition delivered to the bees. We're getting very good at making some of these pollen supplements. I don't want to knock them down, but healthy plants make pollen, and pollen and nectar are the ideal foods for bees. So we want to make sure that they get good nutrition. We have to garden. If they have dehydration or siege from ants, other parasites, those are all little stresses that are going to make your bees collapse. Anything you can do to reduce those stresses is going to help your bees thrive. I talked about us getting in the hive and creating that first traffic jam in the bottom of the box. What if we were in the box on one of the peak days of nectar flow for the entire year? It would be a big impact on our colonies. So even if you're educating yourself, getting into your colonies, it's just a week. Give them a week at least, and every 2 weeks would be enough time for them to get their rhythm back. We have done so much in destroying our habitat, and then correspondingly, because of the lack of flowers, resources, and diversity out there, the poor nutrition comes. And that's the major challenge for bees. Along with habitat loss comes limited choices for nests. So we can really help our bees out, and then you'll have more bees if you set out your bait hives, because you can catch free ones. One of the great things about how bees clean themselves, I'm kind of going off topic, but those combs that are being passed around, they're made of wax, and wax is a lipid. It's a type of molecule, and it absorbs chemicals. It absorbs toxic chemicals. So those wax combs act like sponges to reduce toxic chemicals inside the beehive. That's why it's important to cycle out old comb, because through the action of drawing new wax and having new sponges, you'll have a healthier, cleaner beehive. So it really comes back to knowing your plants, and every year is going to be a little bit different in terms of when plants flower and how much nectar that they're going to produce. Some plants do it by heat. When they flower is based on how hot it gets outside, so that is more going to be influenced by our changing climate. Other plants tie their flowering period to the day length. These are just some of the plants we should familiarize ourselves with, kind of the bigger players on terms of nectar or pollen resources. So knowing when they are going to happen next, and these aren't in order of bloom, by the way, but knowing what is coming next can help you decide whether splitting is a good idea in July or not. And now that we're out of drought, I noticed that some blooms are later in coming this year. Last year and the year before were a lot earlier, and the year before were a lot earlier. As summer in California, we need to plant for summer-producing blooms. We have plenty of, more than they can eat in the spring. We need stuff that flowers in summertime. So there's been a huge landmark finding about Varroa research. For a long time, we thought that Varroa just sucked the blood out of the bees, which would be bad enough. But a PhD student named Samuel Ramsey, who works with Dennis Van Engelsdorp at Maryland, did his doctorate, and he is finding that it's actually the fat bodies, the protein bodies that mites feed on. Randy Oliver on the website Scientific Beekeeping, he calls this molecule vitellogenin. Either way, it's huge. Whatever it is, whatever the name is, it's huge because it's telling us that because the Varroa are eating the body fats of the bees, not the blood, that it just ties our understanding of how Varroa impacts raising the next generation of workers, why that's so important. Because the bees spend their body fats to raise more young. If they don't have the body fats, that's why hives suddenly die. They can leave a lot of honey and then crash. That's not a problem. And in fact, I don't know where the slide went. In fact, a strong honey flow can make your bees weaker, because bees will say, oh, there's honey coming in, we have to keep it. We'll work extra hard to put away that honey crop and finish it. They will work themselves to death counting on a pollen flow to come to be able to rebuild themselves. So if we have a strong honey flow, they especially need those combs of pollen or supplemental feed to keep them strong. So in talking a little bit about Varroa, and I'm preaching kind of a lower intervention for hobbyist beekeepers. I'm preaching a lower intervention. Yes, go get your swarms, but let the bees take care of themselves. You're going to have this idea, well, what about Varroa bombs? What are we doing to our neighbors' bees, our community of bees? Aren't we just creating colonies with a lot of Varroa? That's going to be a problem for everybody. And all colonies, all of them have a potential to be a Varroa bomb, have a huge population of mites that will crash. And we all have to recognize when that's happening. So when we do see spotty brood pattern, increased mite sampling, deformed wing virus, it's our responsibility to requeen it or combine it with another colony. That's what we have to do to keep our community of bees healthier. Know how many colonies you're going to lose in the fall rather than finding out through the winter. Conversely, if we are always, so this is for you first-year beekeepers out there, if you are always giving them year-round feed to push them into accelerated brood raising, then you try and deny them a swarming opportunity because you're afraid that they're going to all leave, what you're doing is you're creating a true Varroa bomb if you do not treat them for mites. So if you're going to, I truly believe, if you're going to supplemental feed and give these extra support and calorie support, you also have to give them extra support in dealing with their parasites. Because the bees need all those body fats, and the Varroa eat the body fats. So here's a link. Randy Oliver talks all about the role of fat bodies on his article, Fat Bees. And bees will work themselves to death putting away that honey. I was talking about thermoregulation and hive humidity. Varroa don't like humid conditions. And old comb can absorb ambient water and then release it in dry conditions. So this is one mechanism that the bees can use to kind of keep themselves strong throughout the whole year and kind of not directly fight the Varroa, but keep them at bay by keeping humidity within a high enough range that the mites don't like it. All this is kind of food for thought, and I don't know exactly how to tie it together. I know I'm getting towards my end here. We know that bees exist in houses, bees that we don't manage, or trees, and how are they coping with Varroa these days? Well, they're doing it by changing their biology. Essentially, they're changing their behaviors, which leads to genetic changes at the population level. Feral colonies don't experience all of this. They experience competing with other bee colonies, but they don't experience the humans that go with that. So, so they are going to swarm more, and they are going to swarm smaller. They're also going to have increased grooming behaviors, and eventually this will result in changing genetics. So package bees that you buy versus bees that have been living in that house for 5 years could very well be different varieties of bee, and they are. They are. So I'm rambling. All right, when we get to harvesting honey, we want to leave our bees enough food, because why would we take all their honey just to feed them sugar water again? That's extra work. So if you have any colony with one cell of brood on it, that's a brood comb, and none of that honey counts for their extra reserve. If you have a shallow super full of honey, that's enough honey for them. You can harvest anything beyond that. Anything with a brood on it, though, is not good to harvest. So it drives home the point that only the biggest colonies make the most honey, and we want big colonies. When in February, I harvest honey from all of my colonies that die. That's a big harvest for me. The other second harvest I make is sometime in June, and what I am harvesting is the spring honey, because that's finally been processed enough. My management scheme is to leave all of the summer honey for them, because once the solstice passes, the summer solstice passes, they do a hive reorganization to condense the brood nest and winter with the most honey that they can overhead. So I don't want to get in their way. I only take the spring honey or the dead honey. I am happy to take questions about hive inspections, and to really recap it all, you got to look for the presence of eggs. If you have the presence of eggs and well-fed larvae, then you can count yourself lucky and that your bees are happy. If you have a double deep of bees, you can split it into 2 colonies and let them grow. It actually can be quite simple if you just let the bees get big enough before you decide to split them. The most important thing that we can do as beekeepers is to garden and to give them that plant food that they need, and to talk to other people who aren't beekeepers and encourage them to garden. That's the most important thing that we can do. Again, thank you very much. I'm going to stay here for questions. It's been a pleasure to address you tonight.